So look, I've just showed the cover page here and I want to talk it through, and you'll see what I mean when it comes to looking at the cover page, which you feel maybe isn't that important because it's the start of the exam cover page. But if you look at it, there's lots of information, and I think it's very important to talk about it. So look, paper one, the emphasis is this. And it says explorations in creative reading and writing. So number one, I would always ask my students what they think the word exploration means. And it's a quick sort of answer. They'll probably say it means discovering new things. But one of the things they've never been familiar with, and in fact, to be honest, I hadn't come across this, it actually says creative reading. Now, that is a big key to what the examiners are looking for in students doing this paper. And then, of course, we say creative reading, and I presume the creative goes with the writing as well. So there are familiar things, but there are unfamiliar things, and teaching creative reading is quite an important one. And what is it? So you can, if you're a teacher, you'll be able to check it out. Creative reading, from what I've gathered from when I've taught my students, is when they read a text, if they read it really, really well and with real focus, without rushing it, they suddenly get the feel of what the text is about more, and they can then infer and suggest opinions about what they think the writer is trying to achieve. So it's quite a high level skill, but the students need to know it. And if they're not taught it, they'll never know it exists. The other thing I often teach when I'm looking at the cover page, I talk about the time allowed for an exam. Now, if you ask students an hour and 45 minutes, in a strange sort of way, that kind of measurement of time is not really very clear. So what I tend to do with students is to say, look, just change that all to minutes, because then you're working with smaller units and something more consistent. You're not having mixed measurements. So when we're talking about this exam, it has 105 minutes of time that's allocated for the students. So that's one of the points. Obviously, the instructions are fairly basic about using black pens, etc. When you cross out, do this. But here's the important thing, the information. It says here, even the marks. The mark for this paper is 80 marks. Okay, so that's easy enough to understand, 80 marks. When you work out the time related to that, you could do a mathematical calculation and find out how many marks you can actually get in the time allocated. You'll probably find it's a mark every 1.25 minutes or something. So that's another thing. But here's the one that really is important. It says there are 40 marks in section A. Okay, so that's equally spaced out, and 40 marks in section B. Well, it doesn't say there that there's only one question in section B. So one question is worth 40 marks. Now, there's another thing. Look at this. This is what you're assessed on as a student. So in section A, you will be assessed on the quality of your reading. The quality of your reading. That makes sense with the creative reading element. So it's very, very important that 4 of the questions, then you're not being assessed on actually on your writing. Obviously, you have to write answers, but you're actually being assessed on the quality of your reading. And that means you have to read well, and you have to understand the text really well to have opinions about things and to make inferences. So the emphasis is very much on reading. Reading, reading, reading. And that is the one area where I've seen students compromise on. They think that by reading and taking their time reading, that they're wasting time. But it's a false economy, because a lot of the time they're actually going to be dipping back into an extract or a source too many times, which is probably more time than they would have to if they had read properly. And then look, section B. So we've said assessed on the quality of reading. Now it makes sense. So that one question is when you are assessed on the quality of your writing. That's when your technical competence as well is assessed. Remember, when you do AQA, you'll find that the 40 marks is split. You really have to focus on the 24 marks, which is your content. But if you spell it wrong and do capital letters wrong, you will miss out on a 16 marks bonus that's added. And then the final thing, and this is something quite dramatic. It says here you are advised to spend about 15 minutes reading through the source and all 5 questions you have to answer. 15 minutes reading time. And I would suggest that a lot of students don't do it anywhere near that, and they wonder why they don't really get it. So look, that's the first thing. But let's look at the next part of the paper. There's some myths about the questions. What I would say straight away, and I'll come back to this in a sec. So I'm going to just stop sharing that and come back on here. So the cover page is very important, and don't miss it out. Teach your students that, and students, you look at it and find out what the emphasis is. If you know what the emphasis is, you know that where you've got to put the effort in is going to get you the good marks. But the next thing is, I would say, is about the questions on both paper 1 and paper 2. There are a total of 5 questions on paper 1. And this is the good news. These questions, the format of these questions never, ever changes. It doesn't change. Excuse me. So there's no surprises that are going to suddenly jump out at you on an exam paper. So again, I would say if you have lessons, and if you're a teacher teaching, if you can teach the structure of the question to your students, in other words, teach them the format, that it never changes. The only thing they need to be aware of is that the next time they do a mock or a paper or an assessment, it will have a different source. So what they're doing is learning how to structure an answer for each question. And if I quickly run through that now by sharing the screen again, you'll see what I'm getting at. And these are very simple things you can do in order to show what is possible. So look, so if we scroll down, the first question is always about just this word here, list. And it's 4 things. That never changes. It always says list 4 things. And it will say about whatever it is in the story. And listing is, you don't need a video for me to give you to teach you how to do a list. But when you do a list, you literally just say a couple of words, list 4 things about Rosie. You could put, on this case, I'll just guess at it. One of the things could be tired. She could be tired. And you just put tired. It's a list. It's like a shopping list. And it's no more than that. So you shouldn't be spending a long time on it. You can do this question in about 30 seconds if you've read the source properly. Then look at this. This never changes in paper 1. You get an extract, a small extract from the paper, so it's quite nice and handy. And you get all the advice of what you should be doing here. And when you're given advice, you should take it. But it says exactly, here's the structure. This will be repeated every time. How does the writer use language here to describe? That bit is repeated in other papers. It doesn't change. but the source has changed. So if you learn you understand what language is, and it gives you samples of what the examiner expects you to understand here, is that language here, and this is something you can teach in the class. It's not rocket science, but it'll help the kids understand words and phrases. So language can mean words and phrases. So you can pick out a word, just one word, like mess. That could be a word, or muddle. That's a word, but that could be a technique as well, because a muddle is when you're in a muddle, you're confused. So I suppose that's personification, but that could come under here, language features and techniques. So when we're looking at questions, they are exactly phrased the same way. In the last bit, sentence form. So that's the length of sentences. If you have a short sentence, it creates a dramatic effect or whatever it is you want to say. So that's the format for question 2. And guess what? Before even the question 3 coming up, I will say it. How does the writer use structure to interest the reader? Or it probably says you'll need the whole source. So let's see what happens. Right, we go to question 3, and these are things that are not going to change. So let's just get the extra space out of the way, and here we go. You need to think about the whole of the source. The text is the beginning of a novel. How has the writer structured the text to interest you as a reader? And again, it's giving you advice. It's almost giving you a structure. So that never changes. That doesn't even, this one here, is generic. You know it is, because there's no detail about the name of the text, what happens in the text, or anything. So this is just copied and pasted onto every exam paper. Okay, so that's question 3. And these are all the questions. They don't change. And the next one is that the student says one. Yeah, and I say that before it because I want you to know that it's always a student says. And then you're looking at a statement. Here we go. So this one never changes. It's always about the second part of the text. Focus this part of your answer on the second part of the source from line 24 to the end. It's always this part. It's all from the middle to the end. That never changes. And then look, here he is, student. This student's been around for years. When this specification started in 2016, if it was a student you meant to be the age of at the time of the GCSE, that means when this student spoke, he or she was 16 years old. Well, we're talking 6 years on, so they're probably 22 now. They must be fed up with doing this. A student said, I was always surprised, and you have and then here it is, to what extent you agree. So look, the style of the question is what the examiner is testing your ability on. We're looking at, do you understand the word listing? In other words, can you quickly put quick fire word answers or 2-word answers in question 1? Question 2 is, how does the writer use language to describe? And that's, do you understand language and how it's formatted, and how writers use techniques and words and phrases and sentence forms? And then question 3, how does the writer use structure to interest the reader? Again, is the same thing, and that is looking at different parts of the whole of the source of the structure question. So you look at the beginning, look at the end, you look at the middle, you look at the mood, you look at the tone. All these things can be taught very quickly. And to what extent you agree, that means we're looking at a statement here that a student says, and it says to what extent you agree. And obviously, if anybody can work this out, it's the fact is you're not going to 100% agree or disagree. If you do that, you are actually stuffed. And then it gives you some ideas that you can use. And then last but not least, we go to the final question of all, and let's just get that up. And this is the famous picture one, when it's always used the word suggested. And here we go. We put a little blurb, bit of context. Your local library is running a creative writing competition. Surprise, surprise. The best entries will be published in a booklet of creative writing. Either write a description of a mysterious place. There it is, as suggested by this picture. So you don't have to do the picture, but this is a pretty good picture. I'd probably like to do that. And then it says, or write a story about an event that cannot be explained. And then it's your mark format. So let's come out of all of this now. So look, what I've actually shown you there is very simple. And I know it's standing and staring us in the face, but sometimes to get students to engage in the lessons, we need to emphasize that the lesson in English on the language papers is very much about their ability to read and understand the information. They have to be almost like lawyers. They have to search for clues and evidence that create the ability for them to make inferences and judgments about the text from their own understanding of it, but they have to verify that with evidence from the text. Look, I have got on the end of this video a way that you can sort of see some of my YouTube videos about how to do each of the questions. I have my YouTube on the website, which is, there's a link you can click on at the end of this. You can go into that and it's free. You register and you can look to questions 2 to 5 on paper 1 and 2 to 5 on paper 2. And again, with the emphasis of looking at the cover page, etc., etc. Remember, always look at the cover page now just to see that the emphasis doesn't change. But we now know that the quality of your reading is assessed for 4 of the questions in section A. That's all of them. And the quality of your writing for 1 question in section 5. And once you know those sort of tram lines and guidelines, you can then develop and revise and get to work better and better and better and structure your time. The other thing I haven't talked about in this is time management. But please, there's another guide I have at the end of this link where you can buy. It's called Adrian's Revision Secrets 1 and 2. And you can purchase that on my website, and it's only a £5. But if you register for the free videos, buy the guide, you're getting tuition for £5. Can't be better than that, can it? Okay, thank you very much for your time. Take care.